Hi, Philip.
Hello. Hi. How are you doing?
Yes, very well, thank you. Yourself, how are you?
Yes. Yeah. Very well. Thanks. Apology. I have to send apologies from Alex as she is not able to join us today.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Very sorry about that. I'm
No, no,
just.
no. That's no
Yeah.
problem at all. I completely understand. We appreciate at least one of you being able to speak with me today. So yeah, thank you so much. Obviously, thank you for your film. It's an excellent documentary.
You're welcome.
Trail running isn't a particularly well known or widely covered sport. How did you find the story, and how did you find Callum?
Yes. First, I just want to say thanks for selecting us. It's fab to be part of the festival, Dean. Yeah.
It's
Thank you.
absolutely our pleasure.
Yeah, the story came about because I grew up. My parents are from the northeast, and my dad was a bit of a fell runner when he was younger, but he really loved the sport. He wasn't a competitive runner or anything. And growing up, he used to talk about it a lot, and I never really knew what it was. And as I got older, I sort of keep going back to certain things in my childhood, and that was there's sort of some nuggets of wisdom there and weird and wonderful stories, and yeah, it made me quite interested in looking at the story, and then Alex and I were talking about doing a project together and collaborating, and we just thought it would be a really interesting thing to cover. And then Alex has a friend who coincidentally was really into running, and we thought we'll ask him if he knows anybody who could be really suitable when we started casting for the project. And it turned out he was a really avid fell runner, and he absolutely loved it and used to drive up to the northeast to do these runs, and just sent us quite a few people who he had met on fell runs who he thought would be really fantastic for
Yeah.
the film. We went through all of that information and created a short list, and after an initial phone call with Callum, we realized that he was the man for the job.
Yeah, Callum, he comes across really well. He has a lovely speaking voice, but also seems obviously very, down to earth, and has an obvious passion for running, which really comes across as well. I felt like we could have easily spent more time learning about the sport, but also his world. Did you perhaps consider taking his story further?
Yeah, good question. It was quite a lot of, we talked about this at great length, because originally we wanted to film a lot of the older runners are still running the races, or at least they turn up at the races to support the younger runners. So Ross Naylor, who's a really accomplished runner, and he's one of the most famous people in the sport, still goes to runs on a Saturday morning with a cup of tea and cheers on the younger runners. And there's a real lineage, and Callum really looks up to the older runners and people who really started these races or have been running them for years, as he says. And we really found it quite hard to limit, really to say this is what the project's going to be. And it was a decision to lean more into his experience as a runner, as an individual, and what was going on mentally for him during a run, and the benefits and the more mental aspects of his experience whilst he was running, so that we tried to give a first person experience of what he was going through. And you're right, I mean, there could be we could continue with the project and go really deep into the history of fell running, and what the sport is and what it is to other groups of people. And we haven't done that, and it is something that we could do in the future, but we're just it would be another film. I mean, it could be another film in its entirety, and I don't know if we're mentally ready yet to.
Well, no pressure. I mean, I'd be happy to watch it. It's obviously great, but yeah, obviously in your own time, and obviously if resources allow. Obviously, it's very beautifully captured in parts on 8mm film. What was it about that format that you felt would serve the story?
So what we went up with a very small team. I might talk about that a bit more later. But we went up with a sound man who is a friend of ours, and we recorded his interview really nicely on with a mixer and a proper microphone and everything. We did it in a pub in the Lake District, so that was where we were staying, and that was kind of what we had access to. But it sounded really nice. And then as we started cutting the audio and layering it onto the film, we just realized it had this polish to it that just didn't quite sit right. And we realized that a lot of what Callum's talking about, they're references to the past or his experience or people before him. And there was actually some real magic on the original phone call. And what we ended up doing was we cut the phone call up as a guide before we started working with the actual sound recording. And we actually sort of fell in love with that. And we realized that much to our sound man's dismay, but what we ended up doing, we used the audio he recorded, but we applied an effect to it. And this was the start of our thought process, where we realized that the fact that it sounded crackly and like he was phoning in from somewhere, like he wasn't even there for the audio recording, he was just calling us from a fell somewhere. We liked that idea that he wasn't really there. And then we started to realize that nostalgic element was what was special. And then obviously we didn't know this before the film, but nostalgia was something that we were really leaning on when we approached the project. And we realized that we wanted, as much as we didn't film an old school fell runner, we really wanted to try and capture the spirit of, the historical spirit of the sport and what it was about. So we just made the decision to shoot some of the project on Super 8 based on sentiment and nostalgia, and to try and weave that into the narrative.
It's used to great effect. I mean, and it also doesn't feel like it doesn't feel forced or sort of overly signposted, but it is there, that kind of tactile and sort of nostalgic element. But yeah, it's just done very subtly. But I thought something that worked extremely well. Sort of sticking really with the aesthetic of it. I mean, there are lots of aerial shots of the beautiful Yorkshire landscape as well, presumably taken with a drone camera. Is it challenging getting that kind of footage, particularly with that terrain and under certain weather conditions?
I'd say yes. It was the most stressful part of the shoot. Yeah, I mean, you have the first thing, the guy we used, the drone pilot, I fly drones and I love that sort of technical part, the filmmaking, and whenever I'm away, I love playing around with them. But what we realized was that Cumbria being Cumbria, you have a really different climate and microclimate sometimes in certain areas. And we made the decision to find a local drone pilot who flies in that area quite often, so that they could actually advise us on, are we going to, for example, we wanted to shoot really high up on Helvellyn, which is a really high peak. And he just said, forget it. Like, what'll happen is you get maybe a handful of clear days up there. And he said, even on a clear day, the wind is just phenomenal. So technically, he said, flying up there is really difficult, and good luck getting nice, smooth, sweeping, kind of steady shots. So yeah, he actually advised us to shoot at a much lower altitude and find something that was, you have these things called tarns, and they are about halfway up a mountain. And that's where we filmed. It's like a lake that's sort of on a ledge, about halfway up. So you have this beautiful vista of mountains around you with forests and things, and you have the water element, but you're much more sheltered, so you can shoot with a drone without any sort of very tricky crosswinds, as long as the wind's in the right direction. But those shots up the top that we got of Callum when he was at the peak were incredibly difficult. We were on a cinema drone, and you have about 20 minutes of battery life, and it was taking us about 8 minutes to get up there with the drone, which gives you 8 minutes to get back. So it was, we ended up having to walk to get closer, and there was a few logistical things that we hadn't factored in, like battery life of drones and things. So we managed to get it, but it was all very by the skin of our teeth, really. Yeah,
obviously a very shrewd decision as well, to get maybe a pilot who knows the area and the climate well as well. I'm sure that definitely helped matters.
Yeah, I think decision making, what we found were that there were decisions we made prior to the project that ended up really we wouldn't have got half the shots that we got if we hadn't thought about that stuff previously. I mean, the drone element is a perfect example of that. And there was part luck there that partly I was trying to do the recce on Google Maps, and because I didn't want to, I did a proper recce the day before the shoot, but I just wanted to get a better idea before. And I just thought, I really am going into this blind in terms of weather conditions and how quickly things can change. So that was kind of our thought process to finding a local pilot. Also, you've got lots of boundary lines with private land. So I thought if we find someone who flies up there a lot, he'll be able to advise us where the private land is and where we can and can't go. So that was the part of the decision-making process.
And how about when you're tracking Callum as he's running? Did you have to run with him at any point? I imagine that must have been quite grueling if you did.
Well, yeah. I mean, we were lucky. We chose to shoot on long lenses wherever we could. And there are a couple of shots where we're very close to Callum, and it's, a mid shot from behind and he's running through the forest. And, we cranked up the frame rate to give it that sort of shaky first person feel, as if we're, following him. And our DOP was operating the camera for that one. And I don't think he was very energetic after that shot. I think he needed a little rest. But yeah, there were punctuated shots. We used that technique only a few times just to give a sense of action. Yeah. But yeah, we were again. I mean, there's only so many takes you can do with a shot like that before.
Yeah.
You get a bit tired.
Excellent. Actually, I did have, because we screened one of Alex's films a couple of years back, Dambe, which was a documentary about a form of like one-handed boxing, which is only common really in a small community in Nigeria. And obviously, fell running is another quite an obscure, sport, or not something that's, widely known. What is it that maybe draws you towards telling that kind of story, something that isn't maybe familiar for most people?
Yeah, I think the draw is it's what makes people tick. It's sort of, you have a cultural, it's not really a cultural movement, but it's a cultural phenomena in a way. So it's something exists in a place based on how that place is. So places are how they are, and things just start to emerge and happen within those places based on the landscape, the terrain, the people who live there. So there's sort of a birth of culture element there, which is, in obscurity, you tend to find the most direct connection to why something exists in a place. So I think for us, and also there's a historical element. So, a strange sport, for example, is a really good opportunity to tell a human story that connects someone to a place. And then you get to tell a much bigger story about what that place is and what it means to them, and then what that sport means to them as well. So it's just very rich. I think oddities or obscure sports allows you to tell, for me, a much more human story much more quickly. And I think, Alex with Dambe as well is a really great example of how you get completely thrown into a place that's chaotic and loud, and you just get a real sense of what it must be like to be there.
I really like, obviously with the Fell Runner, the sort of, on the one hand, visually, the sort of scale of it is huge, but then the kind of personal element of it, is just this one person almost trying to conquer nature, and, it kind of brings everything right down to, one, human kind of perspective, and I thought that you've captured that brilliantly. Was that something you were aware of as you were doing it, or something that you knew you were, sort of trying to achieve at the time?
Thank you. Yeah, it was a choice. Alex and I were talking a lot about how we were going to approach the project and shoot it. And like we were talking about before, where we thought, it'd be really great to try and show so much of fell running. And there was a point where we had to sort of apply the art of reduction and say, what is it that we really want this film to be? And what we realized, it was really about like one man in isolation, and that experience will be something that's relatable to people, metaphorically. You know, it might not be about, you know, like climbing a mountain in a way is a great metaphor. And we kind of wanted to show that by keeping someone in isolation and just having one person as the focus of the story. And then really the landscape that he's in is as much about the landscape in his head, and it's about how those two things kind of come together and how he interacts with the landscape outside, and how he thinks about that, and how he kind of does that, figuring out how to do a hard thing, basically.
Yeah, it's truly brilliant film, Philip. Thank you again for sharing it with us. We're delighted to have it as part of the festival. What should we expect to see from you next? What are you working on?
Yeah, good question. We've got, yeah, we are looking at other interesting sports, and looking at the moment, we're looking at a female shot putter, and wow. with the idea of the concept behind that being not one of shot put, but you know, how does one get into that kind of sport?
Yeah, and
it's a really old sport. So if you think about what a shot put is, it really is just a great show of strength and a protest against gravity, really. How on earth do you get good at something like that? And again, it's more about the mental space that you'd have to like live in order to do something like that. So that's one. And then there's another about natural landscapes and sea swimming. I'm not going to say too much about that one, but there's a concept behind that, and like a historical element to that as well.
Well, I'm really interested in the shot putting film. I've been watching loads of athletics recently, and so I imagine your film will hopefully answer a lot of questions that I've had, because I sort of watch a lot of that stuff, and I'm so amazed how and why. Just kind of trying to understand the sport more. So congratulations. I hope that film is a success. Thank you again for joining me today. Please send my regards to Alex as well. It's a shame we couldn't have her here as well, but thank you for taking the time out and doing this for us. Again, can't wait to screen your film as part of Programme 1 at Close Up Cinema on the 18th of September. Philip, thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Dean. Yeah, it's really nice talking to you today, mate.
Lovely to meet you. You take care. All the best.
Nice. Thanks, Dean. See you, mate. Bye-bye. Bye.